Thank you, Zoom. All right. We have Michelle Oslick, who's an educator and a coach specific to gifted and talented education in Douglas County, Colorado, with over 15 years of experience working with gifted learners. Her expertise includes working with highly gifted learners in a center-based setting, the identification of, planning for, and serving of students identified in the arts and other talent areas, as well as developing systems of cognitive, academic, and social emotional programming at the school, district, and state levels. And this is kind of an area of identification that a lot of people don't feel like they're an expert in. And so we're excited to learn everything we can from you tonight. The title of her presentation is Supporting Gifted Artists, Curators of Talent, Nurturers of Potential, and Advocates of Artists. So please help me welcome Michelle Oslick, who's here with us. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for having me. I'm thrilled to get a chance to talk about a topic that I hold close to my heart. So why don't I go ahead and share my screen. What I'm going to do is present a little bit, give some information, and then we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. All right, so as Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Michelle Oslick. I'm a team lead for gifted education for Douglas County School District. And I have my email here at the beginning as well at the end, because please feel free, even after this evening, if you have questions or would like to contact me, please feel free to reach out. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what makes a gifted artist, some characteristics, how we can seek out potential in schools, some different ways for programming for growth in the arts areas, and how you can be an advocate for our gifted artists. So what really makes a gifted artist? Okay. And if we kind of look at the past and the present, gifted artists, especially the arts being listed as a category within giftedness, has been around in the US since the Maryland report was published in 1972. And currently, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act also includes creative and artistic capacities and achievement as part of the definition of gifted and talented. You know, an interesting little side note is in 1993, the US Department of Education identified artistically gifted children and teens as an underserved population, along with the other categories that we typically think of as underserved. And there are some real challenges to seeking out and nurturing gifted potential. There's a lack of research in this area. And because of that lack of research, there's also a lack of tools to really help evaluate students' potential and ability, as well as just a lack of resources dedicated to gifted education or the arts and arts education in schools. We often hear about the arts and art education being on the cutting block when there's budget concerns, as well as the same type of concerns around gifted education in general. So when we start talking about gifted education for the arts, we kind of have a perfect storm where we don't always have what we feel we need in order to identify these students and program for them. But we do have some pieces of research, especially in recent years. And the work of Joanne Hartonian is where you'll find the foundation of the majority of the work done for the Colorado Department of Education and for the work here in Colorado around identification in the arts. And her work has determined what she refers to as 5 artistic ways of knowing. And these are kind of those characteristics of our gifted artists. The first one being perceptional awareness and discrimination, which really are the critical abilities that an artist would have to differentiate, to distinguish, to recognize or make distinctions through the use of their senses. So when you're looking at, let's say, a visual arts, you're looking at a piece of artwork and their ability to really separate the different elements within that artwork are just a little bit more complex. They can achieve a higher level of depth and complexity than what would be typical. And we have meta-perception, which is the artistic parallel to metacognition, as she describes it. And it's really students using their internal perceptions and emotions to really evaluate and make adjustments to their artistic thinking. So for an example, again, if we think through the use of visual arts, a student, and this is actually a real life example, a student who's creating a pastel painting, and it's a close-up of the head of a doe drinking at a stream. And as she is crafting the eye, the student is playing with color and tries one color and recognizes how it affects the mood that she is perceiving as an artist, and then tries a different color and sees how that affects the mood, and continues that process over and over again until she's getting the internal and emotional input that she'd like. There's creative interpretation, which is really expressively reworking the ideas that eventually grows into an artistic process. So if we think about a dancer in their head choreographing, listening to music and choreographing in their head, and eventually turning it into a movement measure, and then coming back and doing it again in their head to add on to it, which eventually leads to a piece of work. The dynamic behavior and performance and product would be being able to communicate their own creative interpretation through performance to an audience. So imagine attending a play, and as the actor performs, they're continuously connecting with their audience. The audience is giving them feedback in a variety of ways. The actor is internalizing that, and they're continuously growing closer and delving into better immersing themselves into that actor's interpretation. And then one thing that is really focused on is that reaction to performance aren't always through an actual performance themselves. It can be through critique or other types of artistic sensitivities. And last, artistic knowing, according to Joanne Hartonian, would be critiquing. And just as it sounds, evaluating oneself and others, but to a degree of depth and complexity that would really be unusual. So this is one set of traits of gifted artists and different artistic ways of knowing, as they're called, that we can kind of mine as well as teach to help our artists grow. That are known as the 8 studio habits of mind. And really, these are very, very similar to the artistic ways of knowing, that you can really kind of connect them. You know, the developing craft is really being able to acquire the skills and techniques needed to work with whatever art area we're talking about. Engaging and persisting, just that being able to focus on a task and for a sustained period of time, to be able to produce work, being able to envision, generate mental images that help guide the work, or being able to think of new ideas and forms. Being able to express is meant to students being able to learn to go beyond what their craft is and to be able to convey a personal vision or meaning. We sometimes think of this as voice. Being able to observe, really, again, just as it sounds, be able to look closely at their work, at the work of others, and really the world around them, and notice things that others might miss. We have the reflection, being able to think about and explain their process, their intentions, the decisions they make, really being able to evaluate their work and the work of others. Stretching and exploring, that risk-taking, being able to try new things and really tolerate ambiguity, capitalize on their mistakes, things like that. And the last studio habit would be understanding the art world. Just being able to really know their own relationship to past and present and today's works of art and their art world, and how to connect with them. So those are just 2 sets of different types of characteristics that you might find guiding any work in identification, or if you are in a circumstance where you are not necessarily looking for nurturing or seeking this potential, that you might be able to start. Another fantastic resource, and there is a little URL down there to help you, is the Colorado Department of Education created typical versus gifted charts in 4 art areas: visual arts, performing arts, music, and dance. This is just one little snippet of the music resource. I know for my specials and electives teachers that I work with here in Douglas County, that these are one of their absolute favorites. Each of the charts breaks the area down into specific age groups. The one pictured here is early childhood for music, and it lists characteristics of the typical peer group and then characteristics of what is considered gifted at this age. The Colorado Department of Education worked with experts from across the country to develop these tools, as well as others that you'll find on the page linked there. But really, the question I know for educators especially is really, how can we seek out potential? Right? And one of the main ways to seek out potential is really to increase the understanding about referral processes and advocacy through professional development. I know my greatest leaps forward in this area have been working with my district specials and electives teachers, working with them on what it means to be gifted, not just in their area, but just in general traits of gifted students. And then really looking at some of those resources the Colorado Department of Education created, as well as other pieces of rubrics that we use for identification in order to grow their understanding of what this may look like. And it never fails that when I'm working with a teacher on this, by the time they walk away, they have 2 or 3 students in mind, either past or present, that they're ready to refer and to look deeper at, that they feel they have potential that needs to be nurtured. Working with gifted education specialists in your schools, especially with those typical versus gifted charts. They may not be experts in the arts areas, but they usually are experts in giftedness. And so exposing them to the tools and resources to be able to grow their own understandings is always helpful for them to continue to advocate for these other areas. And then making sure that everything is grounded in culturally responsive practices so that we're not creating barriers. Also coaching around the use of the available materials to identify potential. Which CDE, just like that typical versus gifted chart, they also created something that's known as the Jot Down Forms, which is also on that page. This is one of my favorite tools to work with our specials and electives teachers on. These Jot Down Forms are created in a way that, let's say, a performing arts teacher could take their appropriate Jot Down form, or this one is dance. If a dance unit is being taught, they can have one copy. And then as they work their way through the unit, as they see these different behaviors that are listed through students, they can just make a mark, list a student's initials. And at the end of the unit, they have a piece of documentation that shows which students are showing these characteristics more than what might be typical, or just who keeps popping up that we may need to take a further look at. And so this is a great tool to help seek out that potential that we can then dig into further for possible identification or programming. So once we do have students who we've recognized for potential, the greatest thing we can do is gather a thorough body of evidence or portfolio. And this could be, for us in Douglas County, that usually starts with a referral. And for us in the state of Colorado, referrals can be made by anyone. The students can refer themselves, they can refer each other, they can be referred by a community member, they can be referred by parents, they can be referred by staff members. A referral can come through the formal process. It can come through that Jot Down form. Really, it could come through the participation in an art contest and being on the lookout for those of your students who, stand out or nominated and or receive prizes, whether they're district-wide, community-wide. The referrals can come in a variety of forms from a variety of places. And once we do have those students that we see as having potential, we start collecting a body of evidence. For us, there is a portfolio, work samples and artifacts collected either at school, outside of school. We know that some of our students create their best work outside of school when they're free of constraints. So we make sure to include those possibilities. We include student reflections to be able to make sure we get at their thinking, some of that metacognition, that reflection that we were talking about before. There are observation skills. That is one thing, as I mentioned before, Colorado Department of Education in Colorado, our work has leans heavily on the work of Joanne Hartonian, and she has observation skills that can be used specific to the arts, which is one of those tools that is very difficult to find. Most of the normed reference skills kind of lump all of the arts together. And so it's sometimes very difficult to know that the results that you have from those observation scales are specific to the art you're looking at versus everything. Whereas the observation scales that Joanne Hartonian created does separate them out for dance, music, theater, and visual art. We also use parent and student surveys to gather as much information as we can. And probably one of the most important pieces, at least through my work, has been the student interviews. Specific questions to sit down and ask the students about their work, and to get to know them graders art as to a greater degree as artists. I think one of the most impactful things that I have learned through this work is that this student interview is done as part of the body of evidence collection, and making sure that students are aware that, you know, it's recognized that this is a real strength for you. And that just as we are in charge of helping you grow as readers, as mathematicians, as scientists, in school, we want to help to make sure that we are helping you grow as an artist, as a musician, as a dancer. And it's interesting that regardless of the outcome of the identification process, that acknowledgement of strength, that acknowledgement that you are seen, what that can do for our students. I've had students in middle school who, when we come back to complete the identification process, I get reports from their administration and their gifted education facilitators and teachers that it's like they have a whole different student at school once we have that interview. So that's definitely something that I can't underscore enough, that involving the student and really having this be a positive strength-based process is something that can have an impact beyond whatever end results of identification might be. And for us, that body of evidence is evaluated by experts in the field. And those experts provide recommendations. Again, regardless of what the end result is going to be, here's where this artist is in their growth and development. Here's what you can do next. And then for us, after that is when we look at whether they meet the requirements set forth by the Colorado Department of Education and the state of Colorado mandates in order to be identified formally. For those working to develop pathways for identification, it's imperative that opportunities exist for students who don't have access to resources and have pathways to identification the same way that those who do have access to resources. For our efforts, that comes in the form of that body of evidence and the ways that can be provided. A prepared portfolio can be built in school and or through direct work with our experts, which might be directly in school while they are there. It might be provided at an opportunity outside of school. But that portfolio, once it's gathered, we also have our experts evaluate it through the lens of age, exposure, and experience. That way, two students may submit very different portfolios, but they both may end up with qualifying ratings for that portfolio, just because we are taking into account the very different experiences that they have had and exposures, and how that might result in the way that their potential and or achievement has been shown. And one of the main things I always stress is that formal identification cannot determine access to programming. The whole point of this process, regardless of whether it results in identification or, in Colorado, we also have the talent pool, which is we see potential that we want to nurture, but they don't quite meet what the state sets forth as qualifying data. Or whether we don't even have any of that, but that entire process has laid out what the students' needs are for growth, and that we're able to look at providing that to help that student grow. that always gets at the question, so now what? Now what can we do? How can we program to help these artists grow? So if we think through the different possibilities, if we have schools where you do have specific art programming, art classes, music classes, performing art classes, we are going to take a look at some specific ideas around differentiation. We'll look a little bit and talk about arts integration in the general education setting, and then partnership with your arts communities. So if we're thinking about differentiation and we want to think through the same way that we think through our academic content areas, so we talk about differentiation through product, through process, content, or environment. Differentiating through content may be something as radical as a first grader joining a third grade art class. One of our very first identifications, that's exactly how that school chose to program. They chose to kind of figure that out, and that first grader would go with the third graders to art. And we also, at the secondary level, have had that portfolio that's gathered serve as a prerequisite so that our students are able to join upper level classes that they may supposedly have had to take other prerequisite classes, but their portfolio gets to stand in for that classwork. Might also be looking at cross-curricular options, different ways of accessing curriculum. We think about process, it may be something like tiered lessons. It may be looking at different field work, in-house virtual, extending the learning in new and engaging ways. It may be something as adding in questioning and more complex thinking. We think about products, this may just be offering more than one way for them to demonstrate learning, being able to replace the expected product with something different. If we really think around what real life opportunities could help, we help the student access, so what their end result is different, such as mentorship, scholarships, contest auditions. Perhaps those are the types of ways that students can express and their learning. And all the way to environment. Within schools, especially if we're looking at the high school level, that may have in-school programming, providing access to different studios and media that particular class may not be working on, but being able to collaborate and to provide opportunities that are integrated into their day. Or if we really want to think about some intensive programming options, perhaps being able to access digital classes versus in person that wouldn't otherwise be offered. Dedicated arts magnet schools, if they're within your area, or looking at dual enrollment. That's definitely one that we have happening in Douglas County, where we have students who demonstrate through their portfolio and their work that they're ready for freshman, sophomore, upper level classes, yet they're only in 6th or 7th grade, and looking at dual enrollment where they can access a different class at a different building and yet still be able to have their typical content area classes. So all of those are possible programming options within buildings as they are having arts education offerings. There's also arts integration, which is a large movement and has been for quite some time around offering opportunities for students to be able to access content and art at the same time, and helping themselves, both areas, move along through their skills. The benefits are being able to have really authentic and personally meaningful learning. It does help uncover potential because it's a way to deliver all instruction. It definitely helps to construct and demonstrate understanding. Definitely some challenges, resources, teachers feeling like they can do this and the support that they need, being able to have what they need in order to do this well. So what is really arts integration? And it's, constructing and demonstrating understanding through an art form. Okay, so it's being able to engage in a creative process, and both areas, both the other subject area as well as the art form, are able to move forward through objectives through learning simultaneously with this for the student. So what it is not, an example of what this isn't, is if they're looking at a measure of music, we have them count the beats and then graph them. That is not arts integration. And that really is, it's easy to fall into, I guess the best way to say it is a curricular gimmick, that it seems easy and it seems that the arts is there, but really it's just the academics. And it's just, you know, a fun way, but we're really just focused on the academics, and the art is just an add-on. Arts integration is really having an equal focus on both the academic and the artistic development. And both are used to construct understanding, meaning, and cognition, and able to help teach students through that art form. So what it is, and I won't go through, I have 2 slides with some examples that you can access. You'll have access to these slides afterwards. This first one is around sound mapping. There's a great website there that helps teach students how to make a sound map. And students being able to explore different sounds in the building and record them, and then analyze them, discuss why and how these sounds influence each area. And then being able to create sound maps if there's assigned areas. It's a great integration of social studies as well as music. And the second one is a little bit of a language arts one. I will let you know that this is one I used in my own classroom, is using covers. So an original song and the cover that was created in a very different genre or style using the exact same lyrics, having students be able to listen to both, record personal feelings, and noting the different elements of music that were used in both, and then being able to really analyze how the musicality and those musical elements influence meaning, perception, all of that, being able to compare and contrast. And even they could go so far as choosing a song that's a personal favorite and walking through the steps of how they might alter that music and the musical elements to change the meanings that they're trying to seek. So these are 2 examples of what arts integration is. And if that's something you want to know more about, like I said, you'll have access to these slides. Here's some great resources to be able to really delve into that. Joanne Hartonian has a great book, Artistic Ways of Knowing, that have what she calls sparkler activities that are for the general education classroom that will walk you through specific lessons that help integrate dance, music, visual arts, performing arts. That Institute for Arts Integration and STEAM at the top has some fantastic lessons, all different grade levels, and will tell you what are the various activities or various content areas that are being integrated together. So, but what if your students community don't have resources readily available? I know here in the state of Colorado, we have a lot of rural communities that they're just not there. And that's where partnering with local and or nearby arts communities can really come into play. Okay, so I will tell you, your local experts that live in, near, or around your community are your best resources to tap into the greater arts, communities, even around the world, and being able to really think through what makes sense for your community and tapping into their expertise. So some ways to find them: ask around your community. Usually, especially in the arts, everyone knows who those people might be, and or knows the person who they can connect you with. Tap into social media. Try hashtag Art in My City. The hashtag Art in My City initiative is a great place to start on Twitter, Facebook, all those social media platforms. Attend lots of community events, live and virtual farmers markets, library events, university lectures if you have them nearby, where you can access and make connections with art departments. Those farmers markets have great stalls of your local artists selling their wares that you may not be aware of. And especially if you're in a more rural community, you may get some of those artists that travel from community to community in those markets. Okay. Contact your local community college if you have one of those available as well with their art department. There's another link in this once you access the slides. America's for the Arts Local Arts Network. It's a great place to try to seek out some local expertise. And once you find your local experts, like I said, tap into their connections. They will have fantastic ideas. They will have avenues that you would never have been able to access on your own, just because that is their area of passion, their area of expertise, and it will just let you continue to broaden your circle of resources. And how can you be an advocate for artists? You want to establish a why. Make sure that you have basic information around the needs of gifted learners, just in general. What is giftedness, how to meet their needs, really delve into the resources that are available for gifted artists. Looking at standards-based education, in the state of Colorado, we have Colorado academic standards for visual arts, for performing arts, for dance. And so really know what your state standards are. If you're outside of Colorado, if you are in Colorado, definitely look at those and familiarize yourself with them. Look for pathways for identification for many of our underserved populations, and really cultivate those community relationships. Use these to establish the why. Like, these are all the reasons that why identification and nurturing our students with artistic potential, is needed. Know exactly what you would like to happen, who's going to be in charge of it, how is it going to happen, when's it going to happen, where is it going to happen, and know your legislation. Our funding for the arts, there's a lot of different avenues because the arts are included in a lot of our definitions of federal legislation. There's a lot of avenues within legislation that we can explore, and connect with your arts communities. Create intentional, meaningful ways to highlight your students' artists. When you walk into a school, you know what that school is valued by what's in the display cases, by what's up and around the school. So work with your schools to make sure that your artists have equal billing with your academics and your athletes. Really create intentional and meaningful ways to highlight your student artists like that. Not only is it great to help build capacity within the adults, but it helps your student artists feel valued. Reach out to your stakeholders. There's power in numbers. So if you want to advocate, start gathering those that you can help bring into your group of advocacy and help them be the advocates out there working with you. And really plan in advance, build capacity for your stakeholders. Make sure that everyone has this basic information and what you guys would like to have happen and how that's going to happen, so that you can all have a consistent message. And again, here are some more resources for you around advocacy and different pieces that we just talked about. All right, so I think we are at a point where we can have questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Yes. Michelle, I learned so much. I feel like having a career in gifted education, where there's such a heavy focus on academics and giftedness, this just opened up my world. I learned so much. We do have a few questions coming in on Facebook, and one of the most important ones that everyone is worried about is having access to your slides and like the Jot forms and the typical versus gifted peer, all the resources. Everyone wants them.
Because on the very first, and I should have left this up for everyone, the very first slide, I have a bit.ly link that you can access this presentation of all the links. So let me go, sorry, I'm going all the way back. It's going to take just a little bit.
I'm also going to tell you your slides are beautiful. I was looking at your slides and I was like, man, those are just beautiful. Probably because she's into this art education, and they're beautiful slides. Mine never looked that beautiful.
Very much. There is the bit.ly link down in the lower right-hand corner. So you can access all of those links. If there's something specific that you're looking for that is not there, please feel free to email me. I tried to be really conservative and put what I thought most everyone would find most useful right now. So there definitely is more, so just let me know.
Okay. And then our executive director posted some links like for Joanne Hartonian that you've been referencing and stuff like that in the chat. So there's that Nanette said she put your bit.ly in the comments, but it didn't go to it. So if we're having trouble, we'll figure that out later.
We will definitely post the slides on the CAGT conversations with CAGT with the recording. We'll make sure that the links are there so that you can access everything.
Everyone wants to eat up all those resources because they're so helpful and they're so clear.
I'm sorry that that's not working. We'll figure that out.
Well, thankful to have just know that they're there, they exist, and we can use them. One question we got from Mara, how are some of these modified for students with disabilities? I think that, you know, often our 2E students might flourish in these other areas that aren't necessarily academic. A student with autism may have trouble expressing their reflections or the interview piece. How is that taken into consideration for some of our 2E learners?
I think for me, whenever we are looking at any identification process for a twice exceptional learner, we definitely have conversations with families, the different support working with them. What is the best way to gather this information if it's not in the typical ways? So for example, those reflections, we have like a written reflection form. However, I encourage our gifted education facilitators when they're working with students to work with the students, the parents, teachers, in case of twice exceptional learning and other support staff. What is the best way to gather this type of information for this? If that is an interview, fantastic. If it's something else in a way that the student might express themselves, then we go ahead and do that. I think keeping the process open and keeping like, what is it we're really getting at? And like with the reflections, we're looking at a very specific part of this area of giftedness, some of those specific characteristics. And obviously, if that's not that student's strength, then their portfolio is going to focus more on the technique and the artistry and some of those other pieces. We do our best to gather the evidence that we can in a way that suits the student to make sure that we have the best sense of what their needs are, their potential, and their abilities.
All good information. I think you talked about this. It's about potential and achievement and access and exposure. We have to take all of that into consideration. We can't hold everyone to the exact same standard, depending on who they are, where they've come from, what they've had the opportunity to experience, but we want to give them the opportunity.
Correct. And you know what, I think one of the things to think about is that we need to make sure that our pathways allow for both. One of the hard parts is often if we put age, exposure, and experience that filter on, then some of our students who do have access to resources will sometimes come out of that saying, well, yes, because you dance 20 hours a week and you're in the studio all the time and you get this and you get that. Yes, we would expect that from you. But at the same time, they're 10 years old and they're, and dancers from the Colorado Ballet are seeking them out to give them private instruction, which very obviously is not typical. So one of the ways that we look at that, and the example I gave before about the pastel painting actually is the perfect example. One of our very first visual arts IDs, that was a real example in her portfolio with the doe with the pastel eye. We had another fourth grade student at the exact same time. However, incredibly different circumstances in a very rural setting, rural school with their art teacher was also this teacher and this support person and this. They had never had instruction from a dedicated art teacher before, really no resources or access to anything at home. They both collected portfolios. The other student had every access or a resource imaginable, that you can imagine. However, at the end, both students actually ended up being identified because their portfolios were standards-based, but that age, exposure, and experience, but also the student with access to resources also had access to expert juried performances like contests, also had access to competitions that were actually judged versus just those expert juried performances. And so being able to demonstrate that even though I have all the resources available to me, what I'm capable of doing still is atypical. And so that's what we need to make sure our pathways have.
Oh, that's a great point. We don't want to be the gatekeepers to students either way, what they have access to. Jen Strickland says, Douglas County is so happy to have you. And then she had a question. How do you support students gifted in physical expression like dance? So if I'm understanding right, being gifted in the arts could be visual arts, theater, music, or dance. Is that the kind of four, or is it?
Visual arts, performing arts, dance, and music. And something to be very careful of is like the performing arts and visual arts, that we don't categorize it as just acting. So like performing arts really, if we think about theater, speech, debate, there's a lot of different like subcategories or genres, let's say, within performing arts. Same with music, same with all of them. And I think the programming in areas like dance can get difficult just because of what might be offered in the schools. However, for example, Colorado does have Colorado academic standards around dance. So if you do have a student identified in dance, when we're writing an advanced learning plan and setting goals, we're definitely looking at standards. And sometimes we're looking at, especially if we're talking about a student who has access to resources, we're looking at what is the learning and what are the goals that we might be able to provide within the school setting that can help advance that student and growth in their dance area. So sometimes that's not necessarily about skill and technique. Sometimes it's about that reflection, and sometimes it's about that critique piece. Sometimes it really is about access to different levels of classes and dual enrollment, where there might be access to classes that are more appropriate for them. But really, at this point in time, it really is taken on a case-by-case basis, looking at the student, the situation, the school, and going from there.
All important things. So I wrote down, because I think it's kind of a good starting place for someone like me, where I don't feel like I'm an expert in this field, though I've been in gifted education my entire career. The 5 artistic ways of knowing and 8 studio habits of mind is a good place to start, just understanding what I'm looking for. Are these things that would be good for a GT teacher in a school to share with the art department? Or how, because in education, we often end up in these silos where we don't understand everyone else's area of expertise. How do we bridge, where would you say we start to bridge that gap for students?
I think the way to start to bridge the gap is a little bit of a combination. And I spoke to this a little bit, but integrating just basic understandings around gifted learners in general, because a lot of our gifted artists really do have those same characteristics. They just look a little bit different, or it's a little bit more specialized in some of those siloed areas. So that's the teacher that gets to see them. So being able to have some general understanding around the gifted learner, and then layering in those artistic ways of knowing. And for our specials and electives teachers in the arts, once we start talking about the artistic ways of knowing, or those habits of mind, or studio habits, I should say, we're talking their language. That's when they really start connecting in, and they'll start leading the conversations. And then it becomes this collaborative approach with your gifted experts and your arts experts. And that's when, like I say, the magic happens. When those two things start coming together and everyone's able to make the connections, that's where we start finding students.
Perfect. And I was also thinking, when you were talking about the arts integration, like, we don't want to make it this gimmicky thing like we can sometimes do with culture and holidays and things like this. Like, I threw it in there, so now I'm good. But equal parts where we're developing students, that is a great resource for districts or areas that don't have funding for arts classes or different programming, because then you, as a general education teacher in the classroom or in different positions, can make sure that students have access to art.
Exactly. And that's actually where the arts integration movement really started, was when districts across the country started cutting their arts programming. This was almost a response as a way to continue to provide arts programming for students without specific arts programming.
No, and I can imagine students being engaged and excited because it's different. I'm in math class, but we're also doing art, or I'm in language arts, but I get to do this exciting thing. And those sparkler activities from Joanne's resource are a great way to get started, especially if you're like me and you're not comfortable with like, how do I do that?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I'm not seeing, let me just double check so I don't skip over anyone. Any other questions in our Facebook chat? But you gave us so many wonderful resources. We will make sure, for those of you who want access to all these, we'll make sure that that bit.ly works and we get it posted on our CAGT website. Conversations with CAGT are all of our recordings. And then sometimes when presenters give us access to their slides, we post that link as well so that you can have access to that. I don't see any more coming in, but thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. This has been so informative. I hope that those of you who joined us tonight share this with other GT art people in your life, because I feel like this is just a good starting point for that collaboration and that conversation to make sure that these students get what they need. Someone asked, would it be okay to reach out to you? They're a parent of a 2-week kiddo that's not getting access to GT because of the disabilities. Did you put your email up, or should they contact us and then we'll pass it along, or what would be the best way to do that?
I will put my email back up here. I'm going to share the presentation again.
Okay.
There is my email. You're more than welcome to contact me. And again, if the access to the slides and those resources doesn't come through fairly quickly, please feel free to reach out and I can send you that link directly. But yes, anyone's more than welcome to contact me if they have questions or need access to something. Or would just like to know more.
Thank you. And again, this is a great segue to remind you all that we have a Cagty Art Contest happening. Right now, the deadline's October 25th. I do need to clarify that it is for students in Colorado. And I know we have people from all over the world on Facebook with us tonight, but it is an authentic contest for our Colorado students to submit artwork to be judged by all those attending NAGC this fall. So it's a really big and wide audience, which will be awesome. I think we just linked it in the chat, so you're welcome to go check out the flyer. It's a lot of different mediums. There aren't a ton of rules, but we're excited to see what our talented artists are doing here in the state of Colorado. So please don't forget about that and pass it along to those who might use it as an opportunity to help these students be part of a contest and have an authentic audience. Anything else that I was supposed to let everyone know about? I don't think so. I just thank you so much, Michelle. This has been so helpful. And again, this video will be up for you to access, and then we'll get her slides up. Just quickly to let you know who's going to be with us next week. It's our very own Doug Alexander. He's part of our board, and he is in Boulder Valley School District. And the title of his presentation is "It's Good for Gifted Kids to Geek Out on Pop Culture." I could definitely see a connection between pop culture and artistic thinking and things. That might be kind of a cool thing to explore next week. So we'll have Doug Alexander next week with us. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been so helpful. Maybe we'll have a 2.0 once we get like some basics down. We could have you back to help grow us a little bit further in our understanding of identifying kids in the arts.
I love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We'll see you all next week live at 5. Thanks, guys.